The city that never sleeps used to be the city that never shut up. Back when every neighborhood had its own voice, your uncle had a specific word for the guy who double parked, and your mom had another for the lady cutting in line. Sadly, that colorful language vanished somewhere between the past and the present. To keep these forgotten pieces of history alive and reconnect with the true spirit of the past, make sure you are subscribed to American Time Capsule TV. Today, we are bringing that attitude back. Here are 12 New York insults you never hear anymore. First on our list is a word that belonged to every Italian-American neighborhood from Bensonhurst to Arthur Avenue. That word is mook. Arriving from the streets of Sicily in the early 1900s, this term became the ultimate label for anyone acting a little foolish. If your cousin made a bonehead move or the guy at the corner store tried to shortchange you, he was simply a mook. By the 1950s, this word had spread far beyond Little Italy. The real magic of calling someone a mook was that it was rarely malicious. It had a certain affection baked right into it. It was the kind of jab you would throw at your brother when he forgot to buy the bread, or at your buddy when he struck out with the bases loaded. You could actually laugh while saying it. Grandmothers used it on grandkids tracking mud through the hall, and fathers used it on sons coming home past curfew. If you walked down Mulberry Street in 1970, you would hear it 5 times before the end of the block. But as the city changed, the language did too. Mook faded away with the old-timers who understood the subtle art of insulting someone with a smile. While mook implies a clumsy fool, our next word brings a different flavor to the streets, quite literally. Picture a beat cop in the Bronx, coffee in hand, watching a guy try to hotwire a car in broad daylight. That guy is a jamoki. This perfect insult likely mashed up Java and mocha, 2 words for coffee, to create a label for someone acting dumb as dirt. If you are enjoying this journey back in time and want to ensure these stories are preserved for the future, go ahead and comment the number 2 below. It lets me know you are still here and passionate about rediscovering our shared history. Appearing in the Roaring '20s, jamoki thrived in working-class neighborhoods where men worked with their hands and had zero patience for nonsense. Longshoremen and construction workers wielded it like a tool. It had staying power because it just felt satisfying to say. Those 3 syllables rolled off the tongue with the perfect mix of contempt and humor. Your dad probably called the driver who cut him off a jamoki, and your uncle definitely used it when his buddy bet on a bad hand. Sadly, by the 90s, the word began to fade. Millennials never really picked it up, leaving jamoki to live on only in old movies and the memories of those who remember when the city had a grittier vocabulary. While a jamoki might annoy you through sheer incompetence, this next character annoyed you through pure selfishness. We are talking about the gavone. Every family seemed to have at least one. He was the relative who took 3 servings at Christmas dinner before anyone else got seconds. Or the neighbor who shamelessly parked his boat across 2 parking spots. Originating from Southern Italian dialects, gavone meant a glutton or a pig, someone with zero manners and absolutely no shame. By the 1940s, the word had become standard vocabulary in New York. It crossed cultural lines, showing up in Jewish and Irish homes because nobody liked a slob. But the true genius of the word was its specificity. Being a gavone was not just about eating too much food. It was about taking more than your fair share of anything, whether that was space, time, or respect. It was the guy on the subway spreading out over 3 seats, or the customer grabbing the last 6 cannolis. You could spot a gavone from a mile away. Today, people certainly still act like gavones, but somewhere along the way, we just stopped calling them out by name. While the gavone was busy taking more than his fair share, Our next character was usually busy losing his. Step into any midtown office during the 1960s, and you would inevitably spot him. He was the guy with the rumpled suit, the permanent coffee stain on his tie, and a briefcase held together by hope and tape. He was the schlub. Adopted from Yiddish to mean a slob, New York embraced this term completely. However, unlike other insults, calling someone a schlub wasn't necessarily mean-spirited. It often carried a heavy dose of sympathy. It was a silent recognition that life beats people down, and some folks just cannot catch a break. A schlub wasn't just messy, he was hapless. He was the kind of person who would manage to slip on ice in the middle of July. Think of that uncle who always meant well but locked his keys in the car or showed up to the party on the wrong night. New York used to be full of schlubs because surviving here was a struggle. But as the city transformed in the 80s, becoming shinier and more expensive, it became less forgiving of failure, and the lovable schlub quietly faded away. If the schlub was the victim of his own bad luck, our next character was the victim of everyone else. This term is shnook, and it stung a little more because it labeled you as a sucker. A shnook was the guy who believed every sob story he heard, the friend who lent money he would never see again, or the person who could get sold the Brooklyn Bridge twice. Arriving from Yiddish and planting deep roots in New York soil by the 1930s, the word spread rapidly through the garment and diamond districts. In neighborhoods where business was everything and trust was scarce, calling someone a shnook was often a form of pity for their innocence. It described the shopkeeper who extended credit to customers who never paid, or the neighbor who let everyone borrow his tools. Schnooks were often kind people trying to live in an unkind city, and New Yorkers recognized that tragedy. The word carried weight because everyone secretly feared becoming one. Nobody wanted to be the mark or the easy target. By the 2000s, as the city transformed into something glossier and more transactional, the word faded away, perhaps because everyone just had to become a little harder to survive. While being a schnook was often tragic, being our next word was usually just hilarious. Short, sharp, and perfect for yelling across a crowded avenue, that word is yutz. Before we dive into why this word was so perfect, I want your feedback to help us tailor future videos to your taste. If you are enjoying this specific style of history, please comment the number 0 below. If you are not a fan of this topic, go ahead and hit that like button instead. Either way, your feedback tells us exactly what era to explore next. Now, back to yutz. By the 1950s, this Yiddish term for an idiot was everywhere, but it was the fun kind of idiot. It had no real venom. It was what you called your husband when he forgot an anniversary, or your friend in a Queens diner in 1975, after he failed spectacularly to impress a waitress. He would laugh, she would laugh, and you would just shake your head. The word worked because it was bouncy and matched the fast-talking energy of the city. But as the culture shifted, bringing in grunge and hip-hop, the playful yutz was left behind, replaced by a harder vocabulary for a harder time. While a yutz might make you laugh with a foolish comment, our next character was more likely to accidentally destroy your living room. We are heading back to the old Italian-American neighborhoods for the word marmaluke. If a yutz was nimble but silly, a marmaluke was a big, dumb ox. He was the guy who was strong as steel but had absolutely zero grace. By the time this term took hold in New York in the early 1900s, it perfectly described the guy who meant well, but ruined everything he touched. Picture the nephew who offered to fix your leaky sink and ended up flooding the entire basement. Or think of the cousin who tried to help clear the table and smashed the good china. You would hear marmaluke shouted at Sunday dinner when someone spilled the red wine or backed the car into the fence. It was a unique mix of love and exhaustion. It recognized that some men had hearts of gold and backs of iron, but they just could not be trusted with anything fragile. As those tight-knit blocks broke up and families moved to the suburbs in the 80s, the marmaluke slowly disappeared from the city streets. While the marmaluke was clumsy with his hands, our next character was usually just clumsy with his judgment. We need to tread a little carefully here with the word putz. Technically, this word refers to a very specific part of the male anatomy in Yiddish, but by the 1940s, New Yorkers had miraculously softened it into a general term for a fool or a jerk. It became so common that your grandmother could call your grandfather a putz over toast and coffee, and nobody would even blink. The word soaked into the fabric of the city, spreading from Jewish neighborhoods to every borough because of its incredible adaptability. The cab driver who almost hit you in the crosswalk? He was a putz. That boss who scheduled a mandatory meeting at 5 o'clock on a Friday? Definitely a putz. It was not a nuclear weapon. It was just everyday ammunition for life's constant annoyances. By the 1970s, people used it freely without even knowing its literal translation. But eventually, whether due to changing demographics or just the passage of time, this classic insult started sounding old-fashioned, and then it simply vanished from the conversation. If a putz was an active annoyance, our next character was barely even that. Enter the schmenrich. Arriving from Yiddish literature in the early 1900s, this word described a total nobody. A schmenrich was weak, incompetent, and completely ineffectual. He was the guy who promised you the moon and delivered a handful of dirt. By the 1950s, this was standard vocabulary because every single apartment building in New York seemed to have one. He was the superintendent who swore he would fix the heat next week, every single week. He was your sister's boyfriend who had big plans but could never seem to hold down a job. The genius of this insult lay in how completely it dismissed a person. Calling someone a schmenrich meant they did not even register as a threat. They were forgettable, the human equivalent of a shrug. It was the perfect label for politicians making empty promises. But as the 1970s passed and the close-knit communities that used this word began to scatter, the schmenrich slowly faded into obscurity, disappearing along with the grandparents who knew exactly how to use it. By the 1970s, disco ruled the airwaves, and style was the only currency that mattered. In this era, being incompetent wasn't the worst sin. Being uncool was. This is where Clyde entered the chat. Emerging from the African-American communities of Harlem and Brooklyn, calling someone a Clyde meant they were hopelessly square and out of touch. It wasn't about intelligence. It was about the vibe. If you showed up to a party in last year's clothes, you were a Clyde. If you didn't know the newest slang or the latest records, you were definitely a Clyde. This insult worked perfectly because New York had rigid social rules at the time. It captured the awkwardness of the kid from Queens trying too hard to impress the Manhattan crowd, or the teacher trying to relate to students with outdated lingo. But just as disco eventually gave way to hip-hop, Clyde couldn't compete with the faster, fresher insults of the 80s, proving that some words are just meant to be temporary. If being a Clyde meant you lacked style, being our next entry meant you lacked substance, specifically the tough guy kind. We are talking about the word mug. New Yorkers absolutely loved this term because it pulled double duty. Sure, your mug was simply your face, but calling another man a mug meant he was a fool. Usually someone putting on a hard act without the backbone to back it up. Stepping straight out of the gangster films of the 1930s and 40s, this word belonged to the city's rougher edges. It was the vernacular of wise guys and beat cops. Even kids playing stickball would shout it when a batter struck out. Mug captured a specific slice of old-school New York masculinity that was entirely about posturing. It was the perfect label for the guy talking loud at the end of the bar, who vanished the second things actually got real. But as the city gentrified, and those rough neighborhoods were smoothed over by high-rises and coffee shops, the relevance of the mug faded. The era of the street corner tough guy eventually ended, and the gritty language that defined him disappeared right along with it. While a mug was often just acting tough, our final word comes from the men who actually stepped into the ring to prove it. That word is palooka. Spilling out of the sweaty boxing gyms and onto the sidewalks in the 1920s, in working-class neighborhoods where Friday nights were spent watching bouts at the Garden, this term carried a unique weight. It was not just an insult, it held a grudging respect. A palooka might lose, but he tried. He showed up. The word eventually left the ring to describe everyday life. It was the coworker who struggled to understand the job but worked harder than anyone else, or the cousin who could not dance to save his life but still hit the floor at every wedding. However, as boxing shifted from a neighborhood passion to a distant pay-per-view spectacle, the local gyms closed their doors. The cultural context evaporated, and the city slowly forgot what it meant to have the heart of a palooka. Language dies when we stop passing it down, but looking back at these 12 insults, it feels like we have lost something far more precious than just slang. We have lost the specific rhythm of a life lived out loud. These words were the soundtrack of front stoops and crowded Sunday dinners. They were the rough love language of a city that was harder, yes, but also deeply human. When the last generation who knew how to say schmenrich with a smile passes on, a vibrant piece of our history goes quiet forever. That is why we do what we do here at American Time Capsule TV. We are not just collecting old words. We are trying to hold on to the echoes of the people who raised us. Because as long as we remember their voices, they are never truly gone. So do not let these stories end here. Share this video with someone who remembers, or better yet, with someone who needs to know. Tell your kids what a jamoki is. Keep the conversation going, because if we don't keep these memories alive, who will? Thank you for watching and for helping us keep the past present.